people, and hopefully we'll get a few more as time moves on. So we have enough people that we probably are going to use the same process we did last time, which is to avoid confusion and crosstalk since we're not all in the same room. We're going to request that you use the chat function. Hopefully all of you know how to access that. Depending on the version of Teams you're using, either it'll appear as something along the lower part of your screen as you tap on the screen or move your mouse down there. If you have a newer version, it'll be up top in a permanent band, and it'll look like a little chat box. If you click on that, the chat will open to the one side of your screen, and you'll be able to type in any questions or comments you want us to listen, hear, or address. So since I think at least a few people here weren't on the workshop last week, just to briefly go over, we're updating the city's housing element. This is a process that happens every 8 years. The things we want to focus on tonight are policies and programs in the housing element, and also accommodating units. So one of the things we talked about last week was the fact that the state allocates every jurisdiction through Regional Council of Governments a certain number of units at different levels of affordability that you have to show you can accommodate. Not that you have to build that many in 8 years, but you have to show you can accommodate XYZ number of units. The City of Roseville's allocation of lower income units is much higher than it has been in years past. That's true statewide. And so we have a deficit of units that could be as high as about 3,000 units. So we are thinking about policies, we're thinking about programs, and we're thinking about strategies to find land to show we could accommodate 3,000 more units than we currently have planned. And we can focus on some infill strategies and on some sort of new developing area strategies. But what we wanted to do tonight was mostly to hear from you all on thoughts you have about barriers to housing development, thoughts you have on programs we could consider in the housing element, thoughts you have on how best to accommodate those units, whether or not you personally would prefer that we focus on infill strategies, strategies in areas where there's already development, and we're talking about like redevelopment and intensification, or out in the western area of the city where it's mostly vacant land. So we're looking to hear from all of you tonight. This is a community meeting. If we were able to host this in person, which I really wish we could, we'd be all in a big room. There would be poster boards and we'd have people stationed around the room, and it would be very one-on-one, and we'd be having conversations. So fortunately we can't do that, but what we do want to hear from you tonight. So I encourage you all to get in the chat since we don't have a presentation for you, and go ahead and ask us your questions if you have any, or offer us your comments, or if you have anything you want us to go over. We've got Trisha Isom here. Why don't we do that introduction? I'm sorry, I just started talking without doing that. I'm Lauren Hawker. I'm a senior planner with the city, and I'm managing the planning side update of the housing element.
Yes, excuse me, I'm Trisha Isom. I'm the housing manager, and I manage the housing division of the City of Roseville, and I'm also the executive director of the Roseville Housing Authority.
And I'm Susanna Krell. I also work for Roseville Housing, and I'm a housing analyst.
And Suzanne will be helping to sort of monitor the chat. So if you have any issues or questions, she'll be in there responding while Trisha and I may be handling actual questions or comments.
We actually have our first question in the chat, Lauren. And this might be one that Trisha can help answer. The question is this, if we're ready for them.
Yep, go for it.
Are there any plans for low income or no income homeless people? And is there any incentives for developers to provide the same?
Okay, so that's a great question. Thank you. So we do currently have plans for low income housing throughout Roseville. I think Lauren maybe mentioned it last meeting. 10% of each specific plan in Roseville is dedicated to low income housing. And so all specific plans have at the minimum 10% affordable housing, and that's between affordable rental and affordable purchase. So we always have plans for additional affordable housing. Any rezones, 10% of the additional units have to be affordable to low-income households. When it comes to no-income homeless, we don't have any plans specifically for that, but what the Roseville Housing Authority does have is project-based vouchers, and that is a really great way for no-income or extremely low-income households to be able to afford to get a place. Let's see here. Unfortunately, right now, there are no incentives for developers to provide this housing. It's really difficult. Right now, we don't have any, we actually don't have any funding right now for that. We are working diligently on trying to get some funding. I've applied for the local housing trust fund dollars through the state of California for matching funds of $5 million to hopefully help build up some affordable housing dollars to provide those incentives and help fund some of these projects. But as of right now, we don't have any incentives.
Thank you, Tricia. I see one more coming in through the chat that I'll read right now. And then I also wanted to I see a Ryan Joy has joined us with their hand up. And I'll get to you in just a minute. I'm wondering if maybe you can type your question in the chat. I'll go ahead and read the next one. And then if you haven't been able to do that by then, we can chat. Okay, so the next question in here is, the question is also from Ansel as well, as if we mind if we speak. I think we were really going for the chat because of the size group that we have. But let me get to this next one and then see if we can do any of that. So the next question is, how about utilizing vacant building and encouraging developers to update those to become apartments for lower income people? Can also be used for homeless with a slightly different design. Encouragement could be tax credits. Affordable housing does not seem to fit the word affordable, as $400,000 home is not affordable.
So I can take this one as well and just kind of make a comment. So yes, you are correct. When it comes to utilizing vacant buildings and encouraging developers to have those become apartments, that I don't know if the person that asked the question was on last week's call, but we did talk about the low income housing tax credit program, or LIHTC, and that's exactly what they can do. They can build from the ground up, or they can take an old building and redevelop it. It can be an old apartment building, maybe that just needs to be revitalized, or it could be a completely different building. I think in the scenario in the video that we showed, it was an old school building or something like that. So you're absolutely right. They can get tax credits. That's the low income housing tax credit program. And unfortunately, with the $400,000 homes, those don't seem affordable. And there's a program that we have, and it's our affordable purchase program. And what happens is it's kind of complicated. So stay with me. And if you have additional questions afterwards, I'll give out my phone number and my email address, and I can explain and send an email with more information about the program. But very briefly about affordable purchase. Say we have a $400,000 home. What we do is those homes are typically marketed to the middle income households that will be purchasing. And so their income is about 80 to 100% of the area median income. And so we figure out what they can afford. And then home purchase wise, and then there's a silent second on the home. So say there's a $400,000 home, and we figure out that an affordable buyer can afford about $300,000. So the affordable buyer will purchase the home for $300,000 with a first mortgage. And then they will get a silent second mortgage for $100,000 that they don't pay anything on until they go to sell it. And so therefore it becomes affordable for them. They hopefully, most of the time, the home appreciates in value. And then when they go to sell it, then that's when the city gets paid the $100,000 silent second. Again, if you want more information, I can definitely explain it more, but there is a program that we have that does help that make that $400,000 home more affordable.
And I would say on that same point, that gets back to the whole strategies idea and infill versus developing area. So some of the strategies we're looking at would incentivize that kind of development exactly. We would be looking at like commercial corridor planning, say on Atlantic Street, Douglas Harding, and Douglas Sunrise, where we would make zoning more flexible, do some permit streamlining in the area, some environmental clearance in the area, and that would hopefully incentivize reuse and redevelopment of old and vacant buildings, or what we call underutilized buildings or properties where there's just the potential isn't being maximized. So that's definitely an infill strategy to look toward.
Okay, thank you for that. We're getting some thank yous in the chat, and I think some more text is coming. Let's see here. We did get one comment in relationship to the conversation that we were just having, that there's hardly any of those affordable strategy homes.
The middle income, I think.
The affordable purchase, yes. So I can go a little bit more into the breakdown of that 10% of the each specific plan. So out of the 10% of the units built in each specific plan, approximately 40% goes to very low income rental, 40% goes to low income rental, and then about 20% goes to the middle income purchase. And so you are correct. It's not a lot. There are a lot of outstanding obligations out there. And so they don't get built as quickly as market rate homes because the developers do take a loss on them. It is developer subsidized. So, but yes, it is about 20% of the 10% of the affordable units.
Thank you. All right, we did get one more question comment in here, and I'll just read through this. I think everybody else can see it as well. So the comment is this. Ansel says that he says, I'm with House Sacramento, a local YIMBY, so yes in my backyard group, advocating for more housing in the region. Here's a quick version of my comment. We urge you to carefully consider if Roseville wants to adopt a more strict inclusionary zoning ordinance, like affordability policy amendment in the housing strategy memo. The city should first study market context and effects of its kind in ordinance on market rate development. Some of the other staff options would likely produce more affordable units overall. We do support the city working with the affordable housing developers to build more on city-owned land and other sites that staff identified in the memo.
Yeah, so how it's termed in a lot of different ways, but it's common ways, inclusionary zoning ordinance. And for the other folks on the call, what we're talking about here is some kind of zoning ordinance or regulation that says effectively, either the way we've proposed it is that it would be a zoning overlay so that you would have to build affordable housing on a site. If we were trying to take credit for it as lower income, and then it would have that zoning overlay, and you would have to build affordable housing, because sometimes what happens is, aside from the 10% Trish is talking about, which is obligated, if we were to get some additional sites through this whole regional housing needs allocation process and getting our 3,000 additional units on the books, that's just about density. And so some of those sites that are high density can build as market rate. So an affordable housing zoning overlay would prevent that. If we had credited those toward lower income, they would have to build as lower income. But another option is an inclusionary zoning ordinance. Some jurisdictions have those, and that is kind of like a build as you go ordinance. you can't move forward and build more market rate until your affordable housing obligation is met. And that gets to what Tricia was talking about a second ago, where often affordable housing sites or properties are some of the last to get built because developers are taking a loss on them. And so there is a slowing of getting those built. And so an inclusionary housing ordinance can accelerate the development of those. And I also see, yeah, from the comment that you are also looking at supporting us, looking at sites to incentivize developing more affordable housing units in the western area of the city and in some of the vacant sites or on a city property.
Thank you, Lauren. And it looks like Ansel says thank you as well. It looks like some other questions might be coming in, and we have 2 hands raised. I'm hoping that those folks are able to select the chat option. Lauren, do you want to describe? I think some folks may not have been here right at the very beginning. Do you mind?
Yeah, so if the issue is you're having trouble accessing the chat, some of you may be thinking my question is kind of long, and so I'd rather not, type a long thing. But ideally, if you can access the chat, there are a couple of places it might be. If you're on a computer or non-mobile device, it will be either, it'll appear on the lower portion of the screen if you mouse over the lower portion of your screen, or it'll be permanently affixed in the upper right-hand margin. And it looks just like a little chat bubble, just like it would on your phone or whatever. And if you're on a mobile device, if you just tap the screen, the controls should appear. And again, you should be able to tap that chat and access the chat.
Thank you, Lauren.
And we should encourage you too. If you can't access the chat, you can email us. Our email addresses are on the city's housing element update website. We can go ahead and add our email addresses in another blast we've been putting out. If you're not signed up to get our email blasts already, I would encourage you to do that as well.
And that's what I added too here in the chat, just that we could put phone numbers and emails in here before we leave tonight, just in case somebody's not getting the chat option or not finding that option. Nothing new yet.
I see some typing.
Yes.
Yeah, and the other thing I can do potentially is share my screen and show you where the chat controls are, at least on my version of Teams. Because Teams did do an update recently, so the chat may be permanently up in the upper right, or it may be hidden on the bottom.
That would be great.
Okay, it looks like we have another question that came in. I'll go ahead and read that. It says, thank you for allowing Housing Sacramento to contribute to this process. The city must accommodate 2,800 more lower income units than it has currently zoned for. 2/3 of SACOG jurisdictions also point to community opposition as a barrier to building affordable housing. Does Roseville have any strategies to handle these barriers to accommodate at least 12,000 units with 6,000 affordable during this RENA Cycle 6? Thank you again for the opportunity for engagement. Housing SAC is proud to support housing construction across our region.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's well understood that there are a lot of folks who understand that affordable housing is needed. They have friends and family members who need more affordable housing. But when an affordable housing project is proposed in a specific neighborhood, you can get people really concerned about what that means. Part of the way we're talking to folks about that is by having community outreach meetings like this and by trying to get information out there, because I think something that Tricia went over last week potentially, but we can talk about tonight too, is that people are often concerned about affordable housing projects and them being poorly managed and whatnot. But in reality, a lot of the sites that people call to complain about and they think are affordable housing sites are market rate sites, because affordable housing sites actually have on-site management and affordable housing agreements, and they're overseen by the city. I mean, so we actually put together, one of the things we did, and I would encourage you all to go pull that down and go check it out, is we did set up a virtual affordable housing tour. And I don't know if Tricia, you want to talk about that a bit?
Sure. I also want to expand on something that you mentioned, because I didn't necessarily talk about what you just said, Lauren, last week, but it's a really good point. So when we have the layers upon layers of financing with these affordable housing programs and affordable housing units, like I mentioned, with the low-income housing tax credit, City of Roseville, we typically will have an affordable rental agreement as well. And then some of the affordable units will also have housing choice vouchers in them. And I feel really bad because every once in a while we'll go into a housing choice voucher unit to do an inspection, and they say, my goodness, this is my third inspection on my unit this year. Tax credit goes out and does property inspections. The housing choice voucher program goes out and does property inspections, and then we do some inspections regarding then they have just the regular inspections with the apartment community. So there are so many layers with these affordable apartments that, like Lauren said, typically the ones that fall into disrepair are market rate properties, and so there's so much oversight. The affordable units always look and feel so much nicer. But yes, so Lauren did mention the virtual affordable housing tour, and I did put 3 apartment communities on there. I did one senior apartment community that was built in early 2000. It's Silver Ridge over in the Stone Ridge specific plan. And then we had LOSI, which is our almost newest affordable, 100% affordable multifamily apartment complex with 58 units there. It was just put in to commission November of 2018. So we're coming up on 2 years. And then I also put in Pearl Creek, which is over actually across from the Galleria off of Antelope Road, I believe. And that one is actually it's multifamily, but it has I think 23 affordable units there. So it's 3 very distinct, different type units that are out there. And there's pictures and all sorts of interesting information. If you guys have any questions, definitely let me know.
Yeah, and the idea is so you can even drive by or use Street View and look at these properties and see, this is what we mean when we say affordable housing. Whatever, you're concerned about in your mind when somebody says that, go see what affordable housing in Roseville looks like, and I think you might be reassured.
We have one more comment here, and it looks like some more typing. I'll just read the next comment. It says, Roseville is to be commended for making faster progress on meeting RHNA goals than any other city in Placer County.
Well, thank you.
Well, that's a nice comment. Thank you. We try.
Yeah, I feel like at this point too, because of that comment and others, we should probably say the thing that we said last time, which is that, the city makes sure that there's land availability and we provide streamlining, and we're out of incentives money. But when we had it, we provided, over the last 3 projects, we provided, I think, something to the tune of $18 million in land credit and other incentives to get these 100% affordable projects built. But ultimately, they are built by private development companies, either nonprofit or for-profit. And so, it's one of those things. We can't build it. We're like the Field of Dreams, right? If you build it, they will come. We hope. We put everything in place, and it's our hope to attract people to come and build these sites, but we're not actually in control of when that happens.
So Lauren and Tricia, we're getting a couple more coming in. Great comments and questions. So thank you, everyone. Our next one is, once you have low-income apartments, what is the rent increase policy? Seniors who need affordable rentals cannot keep up with rent increases, as Social Security and fixed income does not increase, especially probably at the rate that it's going up. Kind of cut off there.
That's a great question. So let me get my phone so I can actually give you guys a good estimate. So yes, so rent increase policies, typically, again, with our affordable rental agreements, we have a rent increase policy using the annual adjustment factor. And the annual adjustment factor right now, Suzanne, 1.034, something like that. So it goes up and down very incrementally. We check it every quarter. And so say you have a rental property, like you said, a senior, maybe they're in a 1-bedroom at say $800 a month. So if they're at $800 a month and we multiply it by the 1.034, the rent can't go up more than $27. So the rent would go up to $827. So they are able to multiply the current rent by the annual adjustment factor. And that is the maximum amount that the rent can go up. It doesn't have to go up that much. We actually state that in the agreement. It can go up to that amount, whatever the current contract rent is multiplied by the AAF. That's how we try and keep all of our agreements. Hopefully that answers your question.
Excellent, thank you. And the next comment we have, I think, reverts back to some of the conversation we were having. They said that they agree and that for the future, Roseville should focus on infill strategies in the central or older part of the city. I'm not sure that we need it any more on that, but I just wanted to make sure to share that. And then the next one I have here is, along with Ansel, I am co-chair of House Sacramento. I grew up in Roseville, so I'm excited to see many promising elements in your memo. Here are a few quick comments on your options. Infill intensification is an excellent strategy, especially if it's paired with a by right or streamlining policy, like option 9, which ensures this naturally affordable housing is actually built. We would urge you to expand infill into current commercial zones. Additionally, we support option 7 and recommend you replace all R1 zones and relax a lot of coverage restrictions, setback requirements, and minimum lot sizes to allow for missing middle housing citywide.
All right, so we covered a lot of territory there, but yeah, infill intensification is definitely one we're pursuing. At the city council hearing where we brought up the various strategies and just asked for general input, it's pretty clear that we had a number of council members who were interested in that for a number of different reasons, one of which is one of the things the memo goes over is that in a lot of our infill areas, there are zoning and land use inconsistencies that act as barriers and are very confusing for people. And there is an issue where the land use designation, the maximum number of units you can build, came after the houses were built. So, the houses were built way before we had even zoning and land use. And then however many units were on the site, that was the density. And so there are any number of sites that are artificially constrained because of that. I mean, they're big enough to have more units on them, but they need a general plan amendment to build them. So definitely rectifying those inconsistencies and issues is something that council indicated they were interested in us pursuing. So we're definitely looking at that. And we are looking at a by right streamlining policy for affordable housing. We are working on that internally now. There are a lot of things we're working forward as we move forward with the housing element. And then expanding infill into current commercial zones. Yep, the commercial corridor strategy is definitely something that council is almost, I think unanimously has indicated an interest in. Because we've already gotten council authorization to apply for a grant for $310,000 for that work, for corridor planning on Atlantic Street, Douglas Harding, and Douglas Sunrise. And that will definitely include the same kinds of things you see in what we call our downtown specific plan, And that includes some streamlining, and it includes a lot of the use of mixed use zones. So it basically allows more development flexibility. So it's not like you can only build this one type of thing or that one type of thing. So we're moving forward with that as well. When it comes to missing middle housing, one of the things we've been talking about internally a lot is that, and something that council again was interested in, was accessory dwelling units. And the thing is, I don't know if everybody's aware, but the different changes that have been made in the last 2 years to accessory dwelling unit law basically sets it up now so that every single family property could have your standard single family house on it. You can also have one accessory dwelling unit, and you can have one junior accessory dwelling unit. So effectively, every single family property in the city could have 3 units on it. So we've been looking at that in terms of trying to quantify that and how many units we can credit based on people leveraging existing state law in that regard.
Thank you, Lauren. I'm going to move on to our next comment question here. It says, I would like to encourage the city to consider creating a CUP or a zoning overlay to allow churches to build affordable housing on church property and to allow transitional housing, for example, fifth wheelers or FEMA trailers on church property. Has that been considered? This strategy is being used in a number of other California cities. Pasadena is considering it, and 17 churches already signed up, which would create 1,177 units.
So we can definitely look into that. My brain is suggesting to me that there's some recent legislation that touches on this, but my brain does not remember enough about that right at this moment to speak authoritatively on it. So what I will say is we will definitely take that under advisement, and we'll be looking into that, into what state law has to say about that right now. And what I would also say is that one of the things mixed use does is allow that sort of thing, at least in terms of, instead of it being designated for a specific land use like a church, if it has a mixed use overlay, then it would allow a whole suite of uses from church to residential.
Awesome, thank you. And our next chat over here says, Roseville is a very attractive real estate market for the region's professionals with lots of commercial business activity. How does the city plan to craft its housing element to create dense infill development near existing transit or jobs for its local workforce and commuters?
Yeah, so the commercial corridor strategy I've mentioned before, and that's going to take, so what you should all probably be aware of, I feel like I have to back up all of a sudden, is that, so the housing element needs to be adopted in the summer, next summer. However, we don't have to like effectuate all of this planning by next summer. What we have to do is put a program in place. I've just frozen in a really great face. We have to put a program in place in the housing element, talking about the things we are going to do. And then we have 3 years after housing element adoption to actually do all of that work. And that's important because as we talk about one of our primary strategies being these commercial corridors and these mixed use overlays, you know, we've identified the corridors we have on Atlantic, on Douglas Harding and Douglas Sunrise, because that's a really key entry area to the city. A lot of folks enter into the city at Douglas I-80 or at Eureka and I-80. Those two pathways both head into the city's historic downtown core and the intermodal station there where there's Amtrak and Greyhound and city commuter and Placer County commuter services. So it's all really connected. That's where people come in to go out to Folsom Lake SRA. It's where people come in to go to Kaiser Hospital. It's where people go to Maidu Regional Park for sports and other events. So it's a pretty key area, and it's, you know, down the central business district area. So we're focusing on those areas. And what we will do with this strategy, though, because we still need to do a bunch of outreach and a bunch of planning on that, what we're doing for this housing element is looking into those, identifying those areas, putting in place a general program for these are the kinds of things we anticipate doing here. indicate how many units we're going to attempt to generate from that process, and then after adoption, go through a community process, right? We're going to be talking to the community about those specific plans and trying to shape them and finally firmly establish boundaries and where all that zoning will go. And I wanted to emphasize that partly because as we talk about all of this, this is really important, but y'all probably want, if you're invested in talking to us right now, you're probably invested in how that looks. And you're going to want to be partaking in that sort of community feedback opportunity as well as we develop those planning areas. That was a lot, I'm sorry.
No, this is great. Thank you. One of our next comments is also from, they say, I'm with Placer Yimby and a resident of Roseville, right off of Sunrise and Douglas. I'm in what would be considered a natural affordable house. But how would you tackle increasing the amount of naturally affordable housing and increasing density or infill housing?
Yeah, and that's a really, really good question, actually. And it's one we struggle with in this process, partly because there is, as we look at our infill strategy, there are two separate numbers. There is the number of housing overall we think we might be able to generate through the strategy, through incentives, through streamlining, through redesignating land. And then there's the number of units we think we could get credit for as affordable. Because you're right, those aren't necessarily the same. Just because somebody builds a house doesn't mean that that house is going to be offered at an affordable price, right? So in terms of that, the state, and it's generally true, it usually uses density as a proxy for affordability, because in general, as you say, there are naturally affordable housing product types, right? The house that is really big on a really big lot is not going to be affordable. The house that is much more modest on a compact lot is going to be more affordable. So as we look at our infill strategy, we are going to be looking at density, at smaller lots, so that they are much more likely to be naturally affordable, as you put it, since we won't have, an affordable housing agreement over those properties, and we can't. We'll be looking at strategies like that to ensure that at least some portion of what is built there is affordable for folks.
Awesome, thank you. Lauren, the next one we have here is last thing. Although Roseville hasn't seen a major uptick in ADU permits, we believe the city should proactively remove restrictions on these backyard homes.
So, and what you should know is right now the limitations on ADUs are, the barriers are pretty low at this point. If you are, I'm just going to give it for example, if you are converting an existing structure, you want to convert your garage, for instance, that's, a lot of what we see, honestly, with ADUs is people will convert a freestanding or attached garage. If you want to convert your garage, you don't have to replace that parking. You don't have to sprinkler that part of the home if the rest of the home isn't sprinklered. Just so you know, like new construction previously, fire code currently was that you would need to put in sprinklers, fire sprinklers. It's expensive. But for an ADU, an existing garage, you wouldn't need to sprinkler that. The fees, the building permit fees for that are substantially reduced now. If that structure doesn't conform to existing setbacks or other codes, you don't have to fix that. So there are a lot of regulations that have been loosened up pretty significantly. And we are seeing a lot more interest in the last year in accessory dwelling units, and a lot more coming in than we have in years past. In years past, we would see 4, 5 annually. But the way it's looking, we're now getting sometimes 4 and 5 a month. So we've definitely seen an uptick because those regulations on ADUs have been loosened so substantially.
Thank you. Next, we have a little bit back on the conversation on churches and affordable housing. The comment is the California Senate passed SB 899, which would allow churches to construct affordable housing on their property by right. It has stalled in the inaction of the House.
That must be the thing that was pinging in the back of my brain. I was like, I know something the legislative analyst's office sent me spoke to that issue. So yeah, I can look at that again. I can look at that and see what the status of that is.
I was going to say, I remember speaking with the legislative analyst about that one. It's on our watch list. We're definitely watching for it.
It's just our watch list is long.
Or longer.
All right, next one we have here is a question. Will any robust performance metrics and accountability metrics for programs within the housing element? And thank you again from Housing SAC.
Yeah, what I would say is that the most sort of robust metric now is that state law changed. And so it used to be that you would need to do this inventory process when you were updating your housing element, and that was it. But now you have to keep track as you go, meaning that there's this new policy called no net loss. So if you said that this particular site was going to have 300 lower income units, and then it develops its market rate or rezones to something else, you have to make that up within 6 months of that happening. You can't just wait for 8 years and then do a true up and say, well, none of that happened. So that would, I honestly think that is going to be the most robust and difficult management metric for most jurisdictions, because going back to what I said before, we don't actually build the housing. So if somebody else comes in and wants to build something else, something market rate, then we as the city will be on the hook to have to go and find and accommodate additional units somewhere. The developer is not on the hook for that. So that's going to be a significant challenge for us, but I would say that is going to be the most robust accountability metric statewide for a lot of jurisdictions. However, we've got a lot of other programs and policies in the housing element. One of the things we do as part of the housing element is assess how effective last cycle's programs were. We're in the process of doing that. That assessment will be part of the draft housing element we publish before we ever go forward to adoption. We'll be publishing it for y'all to review, have the opportunity to. So if you have any ideas for new programs or policies, modifications to programs or policies, because you think that they could be more effective, or as you look at our assessment, if that triggers something for you and you have some suggestions, we would love to hear that.
Great. And we have one more here. Actually, we have a couple more here. Do you have requirements for providing alternative energy sources for your developments? Things like solar or wind energy. Are there incentives for developers to provide that option?
So what I can say is, again, statewide, so many of these things are now just statewide law. Statewide law is now all new single family construction has to have solar, period. There are some exceptions for accessory dwelling units because that can be a huge cost barrier. However, all new single family construction, you have to have solar panels statewide.
I think the last part of the question was, are there any incentives? There are no incentives for single family dwellings. It's just now required. Is that true?
I'd have to, yeah, probably not anymore. I mean, I'd have to talk with Roseville Electric. I know we did have rebates and incentive programs for solar, but we may not have those now that it's required, you know. But I know we have incentives and rebates for other energy saving things. I know Roseville Electric actually has a pretty robust rebate and incentives programs.
Yes, and then I can speak to that same question regarding apartment complexes because I wasn't sure exactly what they were questioning. But when it comes to an apartment complex, again, there are no requirements for alternative energy sources, but there are incentives for the developers, and it's basically lower energy bills. And so Losi Apartments that just went in November of 2018, like I mentioned earlier, they did put solar on top of their building, and they were able to use a different utility allowance, which allowed them to charge a little bit more rent because the tenants were saving so much on electricity. So they had to prove that to the state and prove that to the city of Roseville in order to use the different utility allowance. But yeah, that's a definite incentive for them, but it is costly to put it in.
All right, so the next chat we have here is from Barbara. She says, I'm also a co-chair with House Sacramento, and I am an organizer with the California YIMBY and represent Placer YIMBY. We have seen other jurisdictions in Placer County shrink their affordable housing obligations, and Roseville has taken on the brunt of that responsibility. Looking at you, Rockland, your RENA numbers are substantially higher this cycle than they have been in the past. Are you working hand in hand with other local cities in Placer County to better determine where and how to meet everyone's RENA goals?
Yeah, we do have a group that SACOG hosts called the Regional Housing Planners. We haven't met in a little while, mainly because the last time we met, we all agreed that we're in the depths of some work, and we will check back in when we get a little farther. But I will say yes, in general, yes, we do coordinate. We have that regional housing planners meeting. We did talk about at the last meeting setting up sort of a private repository for us to share materials. If somebody is working on objective streamlining standards, we might share that with each other so that we don't all have to start at ground zero, that kind of stuff. So we're definitely working with each other. In terms of accommodating our numbers, though, we all have to do that within our own borders. We each have our own number to achieve. And different jurisdictions have different barriers and challenges to that. A jurisdiction like Citrus Heights that is heavily developed has to focus a lot more heavily on redevelopment and infill because they don't have a western developing area of the city like we do. And so their strategies and needs might be somewhat different and differently focused than ours, or other areas that have a lot of vacant land and they can focus all of their attention on those areas, So the challenges are different, but we do coordinate pretty regularly. And SACOG is helpful. The Sacramento Area Council of Governments is helpful in coordinating those and hosting those.
All right, so the next one we have here is, as someone who grew up in Roseville myself, I definitely support legalizing missing middle housing across the city and eliminating single-family only zoning. I'm also a big proponent of letting churches build affordable housing on their property as well.
Okay, that's good to know that, I've heard that from a couple of people now, that you're interested in the idea of eliminating single-family zoning and building on church properties. So that's definitely information we can take back. I would also say, if for folks who haven't been on it, we have been doing flash vote surveys. And if you haven't signed up for that, I would, because it's really helpful for us. We've been sending out surveys asking questions like this about what type of housing people are interested in seeing. And it's helpful to hear from all segments of the community on those topics.
I see.
I suspect that we're putting the flash vote link in the chat. That is my guess for why the City of Roseville is now typing.
I think you're exactly right.
Can somebody, I noticed we don't have any hands raised anymore. I mentioned something about sharing my screen. I don't see any hands up anymore though, and we got involved in the chat. Raise your hand if you're still having trouble finding the chat and would like me to share my screen and see if that helps. Okay. Let me see if I can go ahead and do that without any issues. That. All right. Do you see me now? It can be difficult to tell that it is now me that you are seeing because it probably looks very similar. However, if it's me you're seeing me in that lower right-hand corner and not you.
We got it. We can see your screen, Lauren.
So if you look, I'm running a newer version of Teams. And so if you look up on this top bar, you see up here, hide conversation or show conversation. If it's not up here, it'll be down here if you're on a computer. It'll be down here at the lower portion. It'll appear as you mouse in that area, and you'll see that little text bubble that you can click on. Did that help? I guess we'll find out momentarily. I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing.
And like you said, Lauren, if you're on a tablet, all you have to do is kind of tap the screen and you'll see something similar. When I did it earlier, I was doing a demo with someone else. And when I did it earlier today, it was at the top of the screen. And you have to click on that little box with the little kind of triangle coming out of it. And then you have to, actually click on type a new message with your finger. Otherwise, the keyboard doesn't come up. So we found that out too.
And again, if you have any trouble and you want to have comments or submit comments to us, on the City's Housing Element Update website, get involved. My email is up there and Trisha's email is up there. And we're happy to email with you or get on the phone with you and chat. Outreach and investment on the housing element is really, really important, and we are committed to doing that with you.
Yes, we had so many wonderful comments and questions tonight. I want to thank everybody for showing up. I don't know if we have any other questions.
Yes, right as you asked that.
Yeah, well, yeah, it's fine. So I'm looking to see if any don't show initials. Oh, okay. So I think what you're seeing is some of us have pictures. Our pictures are uploaded into Teams. And so next to our chat bubble will be our picture instead of our initials. But our full name will appear above the text. Initials will show up if you don't have a picture loaded. It'll just give the first and last initial or the first initial of whatever name you've put in.
Thank you, Lauren, for answering that. One of the last comments we have here is thank you. We appreciate the opportunity to engage with the City of Roseville on this endeavor. And lastly, I see here also a thank you for your time and opportunity to comment. House Sacramento plans to submit a few of our comments in writing via email later this week.
And just so you know sort of what's next, we have another community meeting at noon on Thursday, same as this. So if you attended this one, you don't have to attend that one. If you want to attend that one, you may. We'll have that other community meeting. We're in the thick of working on all the details on this. We're hoping to have a draft housing element to publish this winter. I'm trying not to be too specific about dates because we're not exactly sure right now. But we will be sending out email blasts as we move forward. But the overall process is we will publish a first draft, what we call an administrative draft of the housing element for everyone to review and comment on, because we do understand that you may need to see in writing what we're talking about doing to really be able to focus in and provide other comments. So there will be that public review period that one time. We'll take those comments under consideration, make revisions, then we will publish again. So you'll have another chance to look at it. So you'll have at least 2 chances to look at it before it ever goes to a public hearing. It's not just going to be go to a public hearing and quick comment. So you will have additional opportunities to review and comment. We're looking at public hearings in the late spring or early summer. And the housing element has to be approved by the state housing and community development, not just by the city. So there is some portion of this where there's going to be a 60-day review period by the state. And that's important just because there's a time period where we have to allow enough time for that to happen. And we have to make sure that the housing element we put together meets the criteria required so that the state will approve what we propose to do. And there will be several public hearings on it because it'll go to the Planning Commission and it'll go to City Council. Planning Commission would be for recommendation, and then City Council would be for potential adoption. So that's the general schedule. Does anybody have questions about the schedule or want more information on feedback and outreach? Oh, and the next flash vote we're doing is probably going to be on the topic of ADUs. So if that interests you, maybe sign up for flash vote. I don't see any questions and I don't see any bubblies indicating. So that's our general process and timeline. I really appreciate everybody who attended tonight. I'm really, really happy that we had some good, robust discussion and some really interesting and thoughtful questions and comments. Because, like I said earlier on, with all sincerity, feedback on and collaboration on the housing element is really vital. The housing element is supposed to be about planning for how the city is going to accommodate housing for everyone, which means we need to talk to a lot of other people to make sure that the plan we are putting together works for everyone. So I really appreciate your investment in this process and you giving of your time to something as important as this. Tricia, did you want to offer anything?
Just a big thank you. I really appreciate, like Lauren said, your time, because it is a lot to ask to come to a meeting in the evening. At least you're in your home, right? But just a big, big thank you for all the comments, all the questions, and your participation.
All right, and with that, I think unless we have any further questions or comments, we will bid you good evening and thank you for your time once again. Good night, everyone.